At my engagement party, my parents whispered, "She's just a burden for us." But then my fiancé. The air in the grand ballroom of the Oakhaven Country Club was thick with the scent of money. It wasn't the coarse smell of new bills, but the subtle, layered perfume of generational wealth, the crisp, floral notes of 1,000 white lilies and gardenias, the yeasty promise of vintage champagne, and the faint, expensive aromas of leather and aged wood that clung to the club's hallowed walls. A string quartet, tucked away in an alabaster-columned alcove, sawed elegantly at their instruments, weaving a melody by Vivaldi that was just loud enough to feel cultured and just soft enough to allow for conversation. From her position near the towering, five-tiered cake, Mia Davenport felt like another one of the room's exquisite, and ultimately inanimate, decorations. Her dress, a confection of pale silver silk chosen by her mother, felt less like a garment and more like a costume. It was beautiful, undeniably, shimmering under the soft glow of the crystal chandeliers, but it was also restrictive, the boning in the bodice a constant, pinching reminder to stand up straight, to suck in, to be perfect. This was her engagement party. In theory, it was a celebration of her and Alex. In practice, it felt like the culmination of her parents' lifelong social campaign, and she was the grand prize they were finally, proudly, putting on display. Her fiancé, Alex Sterling, was currently a few feet away, ensnared in a conversation with her father, Richard Davenport, and a few of his portly, red-faced business associates. Even from this distance, Mia could see the effortless grace with which Alex navigated the exchange. He stood a full head taller than the other men, his bespoke navy suit tailored to perfection over a lean, athletic frame. He listened with an attentive tilt of his head, his smile easy and genuine, but his eyes, the color of warm whiskey, held a sharp intelligence that missed nothing. He was, by every conceivable metric, the perfect catch. And her parents, Richard and Eleanor Davenport, never let her forget it. "Mia, darling, your posture." Her mother's voice, a low, perfectly modulated murmur, slid into her ear. Eleanor Davenport materialized beside her, a vision in emerald green, her diamonds catching the light with every minute, calculated gesture. She didn't look at Mia, her gaze fixed on the crowd, but her fingers found Mia's elbow in a grip that felt more like a correction than an affection. "Smile, dear," Eleanor continued, her own smile a brilliant, unyielding slash of crimson. "People are watching. You look terrified, not blissful." Mia forced the corners of her lips upward. "I'm just a little overwhelmed, Mother." "It's a lot. It's what's required," her mother corrected gently, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of social imperfection. "The Sterlings are not just any family. This union solidifies our position. Don't be difficult. This union. Not our marriage. Not your love." Mia's smile tightened. For as long as she could remember, her life had been a series of requirements set by her parents. Required piano lessons, required ballet, required grades, required friendships with the daughters of the right people. She had met Alex at a charity gala her mother had insisted she attend. Their connection had been immediate and startlingly real, a vibrant spark of genuine warmth in her meticulously curated, emotionally sterile world. Falling in love with Alex had been the only thing in her life that had never felt like a requirement. It felt like a rescue. Her father and his group broke apart, and Alex's eyes immediately found hers across the room. The polite, social mask he wore softened instantly, replaced by a look of such open and sincere affection that it made Mia's breath catch in her throat. That look was her anchor. It was the proof that this one beautiful thing in her life was real, untainted by her parents' ambitions. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent promise, "I'll be there in a minute." Mia nodded back, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. For him, she could endure this. She could play the part of the perfect daughter for a few more hours. As Alex began to make his way toward her, he was intercepted by an elderly aunt who clutched his arm and launched into a long, rambling story. Mia watched, a fond smile playing on her lips. He was always so patient, so kind. "There you are," her father's voice boomed, startling her. Richard Davenport clapped a heavy hand on her shoulder. He was a large man, whose expensive suits did little to hide a growing paunch. His face was perpetually flushed from too much wine and too much shouting into a telephone. "Have you been thanking everyone for coming? You need to work the room, Mia. Mingle. Show the Sterlings you know how to be a proper hostess." I have been, father, she said quietly. I was just taking a moment. No time for moments, he grunted, steering her toward another group of guests. This is business. For the next hour, Mia was paraded around like a show pony. She smiled until her cheeks ached. She accepted congratulations from people whose names she couldn't remember, their faces a blur of heavy makeup and insincere grins. She listened to her father boast about the merger of their two families, framing her engagement as the corporate deal of the century. With every handshake, with every polite laugh, a piece of her fragile happiness chipped away, eroded by the transactional nature of it all. She felt like a product being sold, and the sticker price was Alex's prestigious family name. Through it all, she would catch Alex's eye. He saw it. He saw the strain behind her smile, the slight tremor in her hand as she held her champagne flute. He would extricate himself from his own conversations and appear at her side, his hand finding the small of her back, a silent, grounding presence. You okay? He'd murmur, his voice for her alone. I'm fine, she'd lie, leaning into his strength. Just a little longer, he'd promise, his thumb rubbing a soothing circle against her silk dress. Finally, there was a lull. The quartet was taking a break. Most of the guests were clustered around the champagne fountain or out on the terrace enjoying the cool evening air. Alex had been cornered by his own father, a formidable man with a quiet, commanding presence. Mia, needing a moment to breathe, to simply exist outside of her parents' suffocating orbit, slipped away. She found a small, quiet space behind a truly ostentatious floral arrangement, a 6-foot-tall explosion of white orchids and trailing ivy. It shielded her from view, granting her a precious moment of invisibility. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath, letting the polite mask slide from her face. The relief was so profound it was almost painful. She just wanted this night to be over. She wanted to be at home with Alex, curled up on the sofa in their small apartment, a world away from this gilded cage. That's when she heard their voices. Her parents. They were standing on the other side of the enormous floral display, their backs to her, speaking with the Lowells, a couple her father was desperate to impress. They must have thought the sheer volume of flowers and the general din of the party would grant them privacy. They were wrong. Their voices were low, conspiratorial, but in her quiet little hiding place, the sound carried with perfect, devastating clarity. It's a wonderful match, Eleanor, Richard. Truly, Mrs. Lowell was saying, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. Mia is a lovely girl. You must be so proud. Mia's heart gave a hopeful little flutter. Maybe tonight was different. Maybe they were proud. Then came her mother's laugh. It wasn't her warm, public laugh. It was a short, sharp, dismissive sound, like a sigh given teeth. Oh, we're thrilled, of course, Eleanor said, the insincerity of physical thing Mia could feel through the rustling orchid leaves. It's a relief, more than anything, Mr. Lowell chuckled. A relief to have her off your hands, Richard? Mia's blood went cold. It was a joke. A common, tasteless joke made at parties like this. Please, father, just laugh it off. Defend me. But Richard Davenport didn't laugh it off. He sighed, a heavy, put-upon sound. You have no idea, Charles, he said, his voice dropping even lower. And then came the words that would cleave her life in two. The words that would burn away every last shred of hope she had ever harbored about her parents' love for her. It was her mother who spoke first, her voice a venomous whisper, laced with a weariness that cut Mia deeper than any shout ever could. Finally, Eleanor murmured, the word drawn out in a long, exhausted hiss. With her married off to him, she's just a burden for us for a little while longer, then she's Alex's problem. A wave of nausea washed over Mia. The air in her lungs seemed to turn to ice. Burden. The word echoed in the sudden, silent cavern of her mind. A burden. All her life, all her efforts to be perfect, to be worthy, to be loved, and all she had ever been was a weight. A problem to be managed and, eventually, passed off. Her father sealed her fate with his reply. He didn't even have the decency to disagree. He just grunted in assent. At least his family's name has some weight, Richard whispered back, the words pragmatic and utterly brutal. It's the best we could hope for with her. God knows she has no ambition of her own. Too quiet. Too soft. The world tilted on its axis. The crystal champagne flute slipped from Mia's numb fingers, hitting the plush carpet with a dull, muffled thud. The sound was nothing, lost in the noise of the party, but to Mia, it was a gunshot. The Vivaldi started up again, but the elegant notes were twisted, warped into a screeching, mocking dirge. The scent of the lilies suddenly seemed cloying and funereal, the smell of decay. She had to get out. She couldn't breathe. The boning of her dress, once a minor annoyance, now felt like the bars of a cage, squeezing the air from her lungs, crushing her ribs. She stumbled backward, away from the flowers, away from their voices. Her vision swam, blurring the glittering chandeliers into streaks of cruel, white light. Tears she refused to shed burned at the back of her eyes. She turned to flee, to find a dark corner, a bathroom, anywhere she could collapse, and ran straight into a wall of solid warmth. "Whoa, hey," a low voice said. Strong hands gripped her arms, steadying her. "Alex." She looked up into his face, and her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. He saw it all in an instant, the raw shock, the gut-wrenching pain, the utter devastation that had hollowed out her eyes. His warm, loving expression vanished, replaced by a concern so sharp and fierce it was almost frightening. His gaze flicked over her shoulder to where her parents were still murmuring with the Lowells, oblivious. He saw the floral arrangement she had just emerged from. He put the pieces together in a heartbeat. He knew. He had to know. A sob caught in Mia's throat, a strangled, ugly sound. I have to go," she choked out, trying to pull away. But this is where the night pivoted. This is where everything she thought she knew about the man she was going to marry was irrevocably changed. Because Alex didn't offer her the simple, comforting platitude she expected. He didn't say, "What's wrong, darling?" or "Don't listen to them." His grip on her arms tightened, not painfully, but with an unshakable certainty. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with a cold, blazing fire in his whiskey-colored eyes, an intensity she had never seen before. It was the look of a predator, of a king, of a man whose sanctuary had just been violated. "No," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, a low rumble that cut through her panic. "We're not going." "Not yet." With one arm firmly around her, he guided her not toward the exit, but toward a set of French doors she hadn't noticed before. He moved with a purpose that parted the crowd before them. No one dared to stop him. He pushed the doors open, leading her out onto a small, secluded stone balcony overlooking the golf course. The night air was cool and crisp against her heated skin. The moon hung full and white in a black velvet sky, casting long, skeletal shadows from the ancient oak trees. The distant, muted sounds of the party seemed a world away. For a moment, they just stood there, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken words. Mia finally broke, a single, hot tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Did you?" "I heard them," Alex said, his voice flat and hard as granite. He wasn't looking at her, but out at the manicured darkness of the golf course, his jaw tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "Not just now. I've been hearing variations of that for months. The way they talk about you when they think I'm not listening. The little jokes. The sighs. I hoped I was misinterpreting it. For your sake." He turned to face her then, and the raw fury in his eyes made her take an involuntary step back. This was not the charming, easygoing Alex she knew. This was someone else entirely, someone older, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. "They don't see you, Mia," he said, his voice a low, lethal hiss. "They have never, not for 1 second of your life, seen you. They see an asset with diminishing returns. A line item on their social balance sheet. They see a commodity they've been waiting to offload. Tonight," he gestured with his head back toward the ballroom, "this isn't a celebration. It's a transaction." And their whispers were just them congratulating themselves on closing the deal. Every word was a nail hammering the truth into her heart. He wasn't just comforting her, he was validating a lifetime of quiet, gnawing insecurity. He was giving a name to the formless shadow that had followed her forever. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't too sensitive. It was real. She finally looked up at him, her own shock and grief beginning to curdle into a nascent, unfamiliar anger. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The "we" was instinctual. In that moment, the world had been reduced to the two of them against everyone else. Alex's expression shifted. The fury didn't vanish, but it was banked, focused, honed to a razor's edge. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. His were warm and steady. "We make a new vow tonight, you and I," he said, his voice dropping to an intense, intimate pitch. "Right here. Not just to love and honor each other. That's the easy part. I'll love you until the day I die, Mia. That's a given." He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand, his gaze holding hers captive. "Our new vow is this: we will show them what a burden can really do. We will show them what it costs to treat their only daughter like a liability." Mia stared at him, bewildered. "What are you talking about, Alex? We can't. What can we do? They're my parents." A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. "They stopped being just your parents the moment they put a price tag on you. Now, they're a problem. And I'm very, very good at solving problems." He let go of one of her hands and reached into his suit jacket, pulling out his sleek, minimalist phone. With a few quick taps, he brought up a screen filled with charts and figures she didn't understand. "Your father's company, Davenport Sons Consulting," Alex said, his voice taking on the cool, analytical tone of a boardroom executive. "It looks impressive from the outside, doesn't it? All smoke and mirrors. But I've been curious. My family's holding company has interests in a few of the same sectors. I had my people do a little digging." He angled the phone so she could see. "They're over-leveraged. They took out a massive loan 2 years ago to expand, betting on a single, huge client, Sterling North Industries. If that client pulls out, their entire financial structure collapses like a house of cards." Mia's mind reeled. "But they won't pull out. Father said it's a 10-year contract." "Contracts can be broken," Alex said simply. "Especially when one finds out the company they're partnered with has been cooking its books for the last 3 quarters to hide its instability." An anonymous tip to a financial journalist, a quiet word with the SEC, things happen. He swiped to another screen, this one a complex web of names and connections. "And your mother," he continued, the cold fury returning to his voice, "her entire world is her social standing. Her position on the board of the Children's Hospital charity. The galas, the committees, the power she wields over who is in and who is out. Her reputation is everything to her." He looked from the phone back to Mia, his eyes searching hers. "And you, Mia? You've been on the inside of that world your whole life. You know things. You know the secrets. You know the hypocrisies. You know who is cheating on whom. You know whose charitable donations are just clever tax write-offs. You know who despises whom behind their fake smiles. Don't you?" Mia thought of all the years she had spent as a silent observer at her mother's lunches and parties. The tidbits of gossip she'd overheard, the confidential complaints, the tearful confessions from her mother's supposed best friends. She had a mental encyclopedia of the social elite's dirty laundry. She had just never considered it could be a weapon. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, forming a picture so audacious and terrifying that it stole her breath. He wasn't talking about running away. He wasn't talking about confronting them. He was talking about annihilation. Complete and total. "They think you're a weight that drags them down," Alex said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was the antithesis of her parents'. This one was filled with loyalty, with fury, with a dark and binding promise. He took her hand again, his grip a brand. "Let's become the anchor that sinks their entire ship." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the man behind the charming fiancé. She saw a strategist, a protector, a man of immense power and influence who, until this moment, had kept that side of himself hidden from her. He wasn't just offering her comfort, he was offering her a crown and a sword. He was offering her vengeance. The hurt inside her was still a raw, gaping wound. But around its edges, something new and hard was beginning to form. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed tears, of desperate, unanswered pleas for affection, they were crystallizing. The soft, pliable girl who had walked into this party was being forged into something else in the cold moonlight. Rage, she realized with a jolt, was a surprisingly potent fuel. Resolve was a steel spine. She thought of her mother's dismissive sigh. "She's just a burden." She thought of her father's cold appraisal. "The best we could hope for with her." They had made their final calculation. Now, it was her turn to make hers. The tears on her face had dried, leaving her skin feeling tight. She slowly, deliberately, straightened her shoulders, pulling herself up to her full height. The pinching bodice of her dress no longer felt like a cage, it felt like armor. She met Alex's fiery gaze with a dawning coolness in her own. A slow, deliberate nod. That was all it took. A dark and terrible pact was sealed between them on that moonlit balcony, a silent vow far more powerful than the ones they would one day speak before a crowd. Alex's expression softened, just for her. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good, he whispered. Now, fix your makeup. We have a party to finish. He was right. They couldn't leave. They couldn't show any weakness. They had to go back inside and smile. They had to play their parts perfectly, right up until the very end. When they stepped back into the ballroom, the light and noise were a physical assault. But something inside Mia had irrevocably shifted. The room no longer seemed intimidating, it seemed like a battlefield. The smiling guests were no longer a jury, they were potential assets or liabilities. The string quartet's melody was no longer a dirge, it was a war march. Her parents spotted them immediately. Eleanor glided over, her face a mask of concern. Mia, darling, where have you been? We were getting worried, she said, her eyes flicking from Mia to Alex, assessing. Before the old Mia could stammer an apology, the new Mia found her voice. It was calm, level, and cool. I was just getting some air, Mother, she said, meeting her mother's gaze without flinching. Alex was kind enough to join me. It's a beautiful evening, she offered them a smile. It was a perfect replica of all the smiles she had ever faked for them, but this one felt different. It was not a shield. It was a weapon in its sheath. Her parents seemed satisfied. They saw nothing amiss. To them, she was still the same quiet, pliable, burdensome daughter. They had no idea that they were looking at their own executioner. Later, as Alex twirled her around the dance floor for the obligatory first dance as an engaged couple, he held her close. To the rest of the world, they were the picture of young love, gazing into each other's eyes, lost in their own perfect moment. But as he dipped her low, his lips brushed against her ear. The war, he murmured, his voice a ghost of a sound against the swelling crescendo of the music, began tonight. And as he lifted her back up, Mia looked over his shoulder at her parents, who were beaming proudly from the edge of the dance floor, accepting congratulations on their successful transaction. She smiled back at them, a brilliant, beautiful smile. The engagement party was no longer a celebration of love. It was the formal declaration of a silent, merciless war. And they had absolutely no idea they were about to become the first casualties. 6 weeks. It had been 6 weeks since the engagement party. 6 weeks since the whisper that had fractured Mia's world and the vow that had given her the tools to rebuild it from the ashes of her parents' lives. The silver silk dress hung in the back of her closet, encased in plastic like a preserved specimen from a former life. Sometimes, late at night, she would touch the sterile smoothness of the bag and feel a phantom echo of the girl who wore it, fragile, anxious, and desperate for approval. That girl was a ghost now, and Mia felt no inclination to mourn her. The ghost of that girl would never have been found here, in the heart of Alex Sterling's penthouse apartment. The space was a testament to his personality, minimalist, precise, and ruthlessly efficient. There were no superfluous decorations, no sentimental clutter. Just clean lines, glass walls offering a godlike view of the city below, and the quiet, ever-present hum of cutting-edge technology. His home office, which they had come to call the war room, was the epicenter of their new reality. It was a far cry from the chintz and mahogany of her parents' world. Here, everything was slate gray, brushed steel, and stark white. A massive, obsidian-like desk dominated the room, its surface empty save for a sleek keyboard and a single, steaming cup of black coffee. The real work happened on the wall opposite, where a triptych of 80-inch monitors glowed with a dizzying array of data. Mia stood before the central screen, a stylus held loosely in her hand. She wore simple black leggings and a soft cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a severe, practical ponytail. Gone was the gentle, hesitant posture of the girl at the party. She stood grounded, her focus absolute. The screen before her wasn't displaying stock tickers or financial projections. It was a complex, sprawling web of connections she had built from memory and painstaking research. It was a social map of her parents' entire universe. At the center were two names, Richard and Eleanor Davenport. Radiating out from them were dozens of other nodes, business partners, board members, fair-weather friends, social rivals, and secret confidants. Lines of varying colors and thicknesses connected them, each one annotated in Mia's new, sharp, decisive handwriting. Owes father a favor. Secretly despises mother. Having an affair with. Relies on mother's charity endorsement. It was a diagram of loyalties and liabilities, a blueprint of hypocrisy. The board of the Children's Hospital Charity, she said, her voice even and clear, tapping the stylus on a name circled in red. Beatrice Croft. She's the chairwoman. Old money, despises social climbers. She tolerates my mother because mother is the foundation's most visible fundraiser. Or, at least, she presents herself as such. Alex came to stand beside her, placing a fresh mug of herbal tea on the small side table for her. He was dressed as she was, in comfortable, dark clothing, the unofficial uniform of their clandestine campaign. He studied the map, his expression cool and analytical. Presents herself, he repeated, his tone inviting elaboration. Mother's genius has never been in actually raising money, Mia explained, a bitter edge to her voice. It's in taking credit for it. She orchestrates events, gets her picture in the society pages, and inflates the numbers. She'll pledge a large personal donation at a gala for the applause, then quietly amend it to a quarter of the amount weeks later, citing administrative costs. Beatrice suspects, I think. She's too sharp not to. But she's never had proof, and you can provide it? Mia allowed herself a small, cold smile. I spent my 17th summer interning for my mother, which meant organizing her files. I know exactly where she keeps her preliminary pledge ledgers. And I know they don't match the final donation reports she submits to the board. An anonymous package with a few choice photocopies should be enough to poison that well permanently. Good, Alex said, his approval a quiet, validating hum. He gestured to another name on the chart, David Gable. And him? Your father's partner. Gable is the real brains behind the consulting firm, Mia stated, her knowledge of her father's business surprising even herself. She had spent a lifetime absorbing details she never realized she was retaining. He's cautious, methodical. My father is the salesman, the face. Gable has wanted to diversify their client portfolio for years, but my father is too arrogant. He put all their eggs in the Sterling North basket. A very, very fragile basket, Alex murmured, moving over to his own screen, which displayed the labyrinthine financials of Davenport Sons. I've confirmed it. Over 70% of their projected revenue for the next 5 years is tied to that one contract. The loan they took out against it is astronomical. They have no liquidity, no fallback. They're a gilded facade with rotten foundations. He looked back at her, his whiskey-colored eyes dark with purpose. I've set the stage. The CEO of a major competitor, Conwell Group, is an old family friend of mine. I had a hypothetical conversation with him last week about expanding his operations. I may have mentioned that a key player in the market was about to become deeply unstable and that their prize client might be looking for a more secure home. He was very interested. Their plan was elegant in its cruelty, a perfectly synchronized attack on the two pillars of her parents' existence, money and status. Alex, the silent predator of the corporate world, would systematically dismantle their financial empire. Mia, the overlooked ghost in their social machine, would become the architect of their public ruin. She would use the very qualities they despised in her, her quietness, her observational nature, her perceived innocence, as her sharpest weapons. So, we're ready? Mia asked, her heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. There was no fear, no hesitation. Just a cold, clear sense of purpose. Alex met her gaze, his expression softening for a moment. Are you sure about this, Mia? There's no going back from it, she thought of the whisper. She's just a burden for us. The memory was no longer a source of debilitating pain. It was a whetstone. Every time she felt a flicker of doubt, she honed her resolve against its sharp edge. They went back on being parents a long time ago, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. I'm just closing out the account. Let's begin. Phase 1, the financial attack. The first move was Alex's. It was swift, silent, and devastatingly effective. Through his network of contacts, he arranged for a crucial supply chain report, one that Davenport Sons relied upon from a subsidiary of Sterling North, to be delayed by 48 hours. It was a small, bureaucratic hiccup, easily blamed on red tape, completely untraceable to him. But for Richard Davenport, it was a catastrophe. The delay meant a missed deadline on a key project deliverable. It was the first chink in his armor of perceived infallibility. Mia knew it was happening when her father called her, his voice tight with a frustration he was trying, and failing, to conceal. "Mia, sweetheart," he began, the endearment sounding hollow and forced. "I need you to do something for me. You're close with Alex. Could you put in a good word with his father? Just mention that we've had a minor logistical snag with the Sterling North report. Smooth things over. Assure him it's a one-time thing." The old Mia would have been flustered, terrified of failing, and desperate to please. The new Mia felt a thrill of cold power. "I don't know, father," she said, injecting a note of practiced naivety into her voice. "Alex and I don't really talk about his family's business. It seems inappropriate." "Don't be a child, Mia," he snapped, the mask of civility slipping. "This is important. Your future is tied to this as well. Just handle it." The line went dead. She hung up the phone and looked at Alex, who had been listening from across the room. She raised an eyebrow. He simply nodded, a predatory gleam in his eye. He made his own call, not to his father, but to his contact at the Conwell Group. "The first crack has appeared in the dam," Alex said into the phone. "Be ready to move." 2 days later, the report was finally released to Davenport Sons. But by then, it was too late. The Conwell Group, armed with Alex's insider knowledge of the Davenports' exact vulnerabilities, had already approached the board of Sterling North. They didn't offer a better price, they offered something far more valuable: stability. They presented a meticulously researched proposal highlighting their diverse infrastructure and robust contingency plans, a stark contrast to the now exposed frailty of Davenport Sons' over-reliance on a single contract. The seed of doubt was planted. Phase 2, the social attack. While Alex was moving corporate mountains, Mia was preparing her own, more intimate assault. Her first target was Sheila Gable, the perpetually anxious wife of her father's business partner. Sheila was a notorious gossip, but she cloaked her information-mongering in a veil of breathless concern. She was the perfect vector for the virus of distrust Mia intended to release. Mia invited her for tea at a ridiculously twee cafe called the Gilded Spoon, a place her mother adored and Sheila frequented. She wore a cream-colored dress, styled her hair in soft waves, and applied minimal makeup. She needed to look the part, the sweet, slightly overwhelmed fiancé, worried about the pressures of her new life. "Mia, darling. You're glowing," Sheila gushed, air-kissing both of Mia's cheeks. "This engagement is just the best thing that could have happened." "Oh, Sheila, thank you," Mia said, expertly pitching her voice to sound fragile. "It's all a bit much, to be honest. The planning, the families, it's a lot of pressure." They ordered jasmine tea and macarons. For 10 minutes, Mia let Sheila dominate the conversation, listening to her complain about her interior decorator and her husband's long hours. Then, she saw her opening. "David must be working so hard," Mia said, her eyes wide with feigned sympathy. "My father is, too. He's been so stressed lately, with the Sterling North account and, well, everything." Sheila leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Oh? Is there trouble?" Mia took a delicate sip of her tea, hesitating for a moment, as if debating whether to say more. "Oh, no, not trouble, exactly. It's just, well, I probably shouldn't say anything. It's business." "Mia, you can tell me," Sheila insisted, placing a bony, ring-laden hand on Mia's arm. "We're practically family." Mia looked down at her lap, a perfect picture of filial conflict. "It's just. Father has been talking about the future of the company. He has this vision for a new solo venture, something leaner and more aggressive. He says partnerships can hold you back in this market." She looked up, her expression one of pure, innocent worry. "I'm sure he doesn't mean he'd ever cut David out. They've been together for so long. But, he keeps talking about the burden of having to share the spoils." I just get so worried for him, that he's taking on too much. She let the words hang in the air. She hadn't explicitly said Richard Davenport was planning to betray his partner. She had simply planted the idea, wrapped in the guise of a concerned daughter. She saw it land. A flicker of something cold and calculating passed behind Sheila's worried expression. The hand on Mia's arm tightened for a fraction of a second. Sheila would go home and repeat every word to her husband, David. And David Gable, the cautious, methodical man who had long harbored doubts about Richard Davenport's recklessness, would start making plans to protect himself. The internal foundation of Davenport's sons had just been fractured. Escalation. The first 2 attacks rippled through her parents' lives in subtle ways. Her father was constantly on the phone, his voice a low, angry growl. Her mother complained that Sheila Gable had been unforgivably frosty at a recent luncheon. They were annoyed, stressed. But they weren't broken yet. It was time for the second wave. Alex made the next move. He packaged the information about Davenport's sons' creative accounting, the inflated profit margins, the delayed reporting of liabilities, into a neat, anonymous file. He sent it via a secure, encrypted service to Camilla Thorne, a notoriously tenacious financial journalist known for her corporate takedowns. He didn't include everything, just enough to light a fire. 3 days later, a small but damaging article appeared on a respected financial news site under the headline, "Questions Mount Over Davenport's Son's Financial Health Amidst Project Delays." The article was filled with veiled language about unorthodox accounting practices and concerns from market analysts. It didn't outright accuse them of fraud, but it reeked of impropriety. The fallout was immediate. The phones at Davenport's Sons began ringing off the hook. Smaller clients, spooked by the article, began pulling their accounts. The company's stock, of which her parents held a majority share, dipped 5 points, then 10. That evening, Mia's mother called, her voice a high-pitched frantic wail. "Mia! Have you seen this disgusting article? It's slander. Your father is in a state. This is a deliberate attack. It's our rivals, it has to be." "That's terrible, Mother," Mia said, her voice a cool balm of sympathy over the phone. She was sitting in the war room, watching the Davenport Sun stock ticker glow a satisfying, bloody red. "Terrible? It's a catastrophe. This is exactly why we need the Sterling family's backing. Alex needs to issue a statement of support. His family's name would silence all of this. You need to talk to him, Mia. You need to make him understand." "I'll see what I can do, Mother," Mia promised, the lie tasting sweet as sugar. She hung up and turned to Alex. "They want you to be their shield." "I know," he said, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Instead, I'm going to be the sword." Now it was Mia's turn again. Her target was Beatrice Croft and the charity board. The time for subtlety was over. She had already retrieved the files she needed from her parents' home office during a brief, staged visit to pick up a childhood photo album. It had been nauseating to be in that house, to play the role of the dutiful daughter, but the prize had been worth it. She photocopied 2 key documents. The first was her mother's initial pledge ledger from the previous year's gala, showing a personal commitment of $250,000, scrawled in her mother's dramatic cursive. The second was a carbon copy of the final, official donation receipt for only $50,000. Tucked into the ledger was a small handwritten note from her mother to their accountant. "Let's reallocate the rest to the gala marketing PR budget. The exposure is the real donation, after all." It was the smoking gun. She placed the copies in a plain manila envelope, typed Beatrice Croft's name and address on the front with a vintage typewriter she'd bought online for this very purpose, and mailed it from a post office in a different county. No note. No explanation. The documents spoke for themselves. A week passed in agonizing silence. Mia knew Beatrice Croft was not a woman who acted rashly. Then, the call came. Not to Mia, but to Eleanor Davenport. Mia learned about it from her mother, who called her in a state of absolute hysteria. "She's out," Eleanor shrieked into the phone, her voice cracking with disbelief and rage. "Beatrice Croft and that cabal of old crows," they called an emergency board meeting. "They've suspended me, pending a financial review. Someone leaked my private files. Can you believe the treachery? After everything I've done for that foundation." My name is being dragged through the mud. Mia listened, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. She felt a surge of something dark and triumphant. Mother, that's... I'm so sorry. Who would do such a thing? I don't know, her mother sobbed. Sheila Gable is avoiding my calls, the Hendersons canceled dinner with us. It's like we have the plague. This is all your father's fault. This business with his company is making us look weak, unstable. No one wants to associate with failure. The final pillar, her mother's carefully constructed social empire, was beginning to crumble. Her name, once a badge of honor in the society pages, was now a toxic whisper at cocktail parties and luncheons. The lunch. A few days later, her mother demanded, lunch. She chose La Perle, a ridiculously overpriced restaurant where the main currency was not money, but visibility. It was a place Eleanor Davenport used to hold court. Today, Mia noticed, they were seated at a less desirable table near the kitchen. Her mother looked diminished. Her usual impeccable makeup was slightly too thick, as if trying to plaster over the new stress lines around her eyes. Her smile was a brittle, painted-on thing that didn't reach the paranoid glitter in her eyes. It's a nightmare, Mia, she said after ordering a glass of Sancerre with a trembling hand. A complete and utter nightmare. Your father is like a caged animal, roaring at everyone. The bank is calling about the loan. David Gable is talking to lawyers, can you imagine? His own partner. And my friends, she said the word as if it tasted like poison, have all abandoned me. Mia watched her, a strange sense of detachment settling over her. This frantic, desperate woman was a stranger. The powerful, critical matriarch who had ruled her life with an iron fist was gone, replaced by this crumbling ruin. I don't know what to do, Eleanor confessed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We're in trouble, Mia. Real trouble. She reached across the table and grasped Mia's hand, her rings cold against Mia's skin. You and Alex need to help us. We're your family. His family has endless resources. They could make one call and fix all of this. Your father's business, my reputation, it can all be saved. You have to convince him. Mia looked at her mother's manicured hand on hers. She remembered all the times she had longed for that touch, for a sign of affection, a moment of genuine connection. Now, receiving it, she felt nothing but a profound, icy calm. Her mother wasn't reaching out in love. It was a drowning woman grabbing at a life raft. She gently extracted her hand and placed it in her lap. I've spoken to Alex, Mother, she said, her voice soft and even. He's very concerned, of course. But his father believes it's best not to get involved in another family's internal business affairs. It would be improper. She used their own language against them, the cold, formal vocabulary of social propriety. Her mother's face crumpled. Improper? We're about to be family. What's improper is letting your future in-laws go bankrupt. Mia simply looked at her, her expression one of polite, distant sympathy. The puppet master watched the puppet dance on its strings, entirely unaware of the hands controlling its every move. For the first time in her life, she held all the power. And the feeling was intoxicating. She was no longer their burden. She was their judge, jury, and, very soon, their executioner. The cracks become chasms. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion collapse. The Sterling North Board officially announced they were terminating their contract with Davenport Sons and moving their business to the Conwell Group, citing a need for greater fiscal stability. It was the kill shot. Without their primary revenue stream, Davenport Sons was insolvent. The bank called in their loan. Layoff notices went out. The company that had been her father's entire identity, the legacy he prized above his own family, was being dismantled piece by piece. The social shunning was just as brutal. Invitations to galas and fundraisers, which had once flooded their mailbox, dried up completely. When Mia's parents tried to attend a charity art auction, a desperate attempt to project an image of normalcy, they were treated like pariahs. People would see them coming and suddenly find a fascinating piece of art to inspect on the other side of the room. Whispers followed them like a trail of smoke. Mia heard from a former school acquaintance that her parents had gotten into a screaming match in the middle of the Oakhaven Country Club grill room. Richard accusing Eleanor of destroying their social standing with her charity scandal. Eleanor accusing Richard of being a washed-up failure who had bankrupted them. Their perfect, united front had shattered, revealing the ugly, selfish reality beneath. They were turning on each other, just as Alex had predicted. They were isolated, terrified, and running out of options. Which led, inevitably, to the final, desperate move. Mia was at Alex's apartment, reviewing the final documents for his acquisition of her father's debt, when her phone rang. It was her father. She let it ring 4 times before answering, a small act of control. His voice was unrecognizable. The usual arrogant boom was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy tone she had never heard before. It was the voice of a defeated man. "Mia," he said, his voice raspy. "Your mother and we need to see you. You and Alex. We're having an emergency family dinner tomorrow night. At the house. We need to talk." It wasn't a request. It was a summons from a king who didn't realize he had already been deposed. They still believed they held some power over her. They still saw Alex as their last, best hope for a bailout. They were walking, willingly, into the final trap. "Of course, father," Mia said, her voice smooth as silk. "We'll be there." She ended the call and looked up at Alex, who was watching her, his expression grimly expectant. She didn't need to say a word. He saw the cold fire in her eyes, the resolute set of her jaw. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the game was almost over. The architect had designed their ruin, the foundations were destroyed, and the walls had come crashing down. All that was left was to stand in the rubble and pronounce the sentence. The final act was about to begin. The drive to her parents' house was a journey through a landscape of ghosts. Every manicured lawn, every towering oak tree, every ridiculously oversized mailbox was a landmark from a past Mia no longer recognized as her own. She had spent 2 decades on these winding suburban roads, a passenger in her own life, being ferried to piano lessons, tennis practice, and social engagements designed to mold her into a suitable accessory for the Davenport name. Now, sitting in the supple leather passenger seat of Alex's sleek, silent electric car, she felt like a foreign dignitary visiting the ruins of a fallen empire. The Davenport mansion stood at the end of a long, curving driveway, its grand, columned facade attempting to project an aura of timeless, unshakable wealth. But tonight, it failed. The lights in the mullioned windows seemed dimmer, casting a sallow, sickly glow. The usually immaculate rose bushes lining the flagstone walk were slightly overgrown, a few brown, dead heads drooping mournfully. The opulence felt hollow, like a beautifully preserved corpse. It was a house in mourning for itself. Alex pulled the car to a smooth stop behind her father's once-prized Jaguar, which now looked in need of a wash. He cut the engine, and for a moment, the only sound was the faint whisper of the wind through the trees. He didn't look at her, but reached across the console and took her hand. His was warm, strong, and steady. Hers was cool and completely still. "Last chance to turn back," he said quietly, his voice a low vibration in the silent car. "We can drive away. Disappear. Let them crumble on their own." Mia turned her head and looked at him. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, she could see the unwavering resolve in his eyes, but she also saw the question behind it. This wasn't just about strategy for him anymore. It was about her. He was offering her an out, a final chance to choose a path without this last, brutal confrontation. She thought of the girl on the balcony, shattered and weeping. She thought of the cold, dismissive whisper that had become the defining sound of her life. Turning back wasn't an escape, it would be a betrayal of the woman she had been forced to become. "No," she said, her voice clear and hard as a diamond. "They made a debt. Tonight, we're just here to collect." She squeezed his hand once, a gesture of finality, and then released it, pulling her own strength around her like a cloak. She opened her door and stepped out into the crisp night air. The final act had begun. The heavy oak door was opened not by a housekeeper, but by her father. The sight of him was jarring. Richard Davenport had always been a man who filled a room, his presence a physical force of blustering arrogance and expensive cologne. The man standing before her now seemed to have shrunk. His bespoke suit hung loosely on his frame, his shoulders were slumped, and the usual ready confidence in his face had been replaced by a pallid, doughy desperation. The stress had aged him a decade in 6 weeks. "Mia." "Alex," he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. Come in. He led them through the cavernous marble foyer into the formal dining room. The long, polished mahogany table, which could seat 20, was set for only 4. The extravagant floral centerpiece was gone, replaced by a pair of lonely-looking silver candlesticks. The room felt cavernous and cold, the silence echoing off the high, coffered ceilings. Her mother was already seated at the head of the table, a rigid, brittle statue carved from ice. Eleanor Davenport had always used her beauty and grace as both a shield and a weapon. Tonight, the shield was cracked. Her makeup was a mask of perfection, but it couldn't hide the frantic, hunted look in her eyes or the faint, persistent tremor in her hand as she clutched a wine glass. She looked like a queen surveying the last moments of her reign from a throne of ashes. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice tight and clipped, devoid of its usual musical lilt. The meal that followed was the most excruciating of Mia's life. A sullen, agency-hired caterer served a bland, joyless meal of poached salmon and asparagus. The silence at the table was a suffocating weight, broken only by the clinking of silverware against porcelain. Her parents ate little, pushing the food around their plates with a kind of weary resignation. They kept glancing at Alex, their expressions a pathetic mixture of hope and fear, like condemned prisoners appealing to a visiting monarch for a pardon. Mia and Alex ate with a deliberate, unhurried calm. They were not guests. They were observers. They were waiting. Finally, as the barely touched dinner plates were cleared, her father pushed his chair back, the sound scraping loudly in the quiet room. He cleared his throat. The plea, as they both knew it would be, began. "We'll get straight to the point," Richard said, trying to summon a shadow of his old, commanding tone and failing. "We're in trouble. Serious trouble. It's no secret." He laid it all out, his voice growing more desperate with every admission of failure. He spoke of the Sterling North contract as a vicious, backstabbing betrayal. He described the journalist's article as a cowardly, anonymous attack. He detailed the bank calling in their loans, the desertion of their clients, the impending, unavoidable bankruptcy of the company that bore his family's name. Eleanor picked up the narrative, her voice trembling with self-pity. She lamented her own fall from grace, the social shunning, the treachery of her friends, the humiliation of being suspended from her own charity board. She painted a picture of 2 innocent, hard-working people being torn down by a cruel and jealous world. In their entire litany of woes, there was not a single word of self-reflection. Not a flicker of acknowledgement that their own arrogance, their own greed, their own actions had led them to this point. They were, as they had always been, the blameless victims of circumstance. And then came the demand. It was not a request. It was never a request with them. It was an assertion of what they believed was their due. "You're our daughter, Mia," her mother said, her voice taking on a sharp, wheedling edge. "It is your duty to help us. Family helps family. It's the natural order of things." Her father turned his desperate gaze on Alex. "And Alex, you're about to be part of this family. A man of your means, of your family's influence, you have to step in. A word from your father could have the bank back off. A small investment, a loan, that's all we're asking, could keep the company afloat until we can recover." He leaned forward, attempting a magnanimous gesture. "In fact, I'll do you one better. I'll make you a full partner. A controlling share in Davenport Sons. We can rebuild it, together. It'll be your legacy, too." He sat back, a flicker of his old arrogance returning, as if he believed he had just presented them with an offer too generous to refuse. They looked at Mia and Alex expectantly, waiting for their salvation. The moment had arrived. Mia carefully placed her fork and knife on her plate, the quiet click of metal on china the only sound. She took a sip of water, her movements measured and serene. The timid, anxious girl who would have crumbled under the weight of this parental demand was gone forever. In her place sat a woman of ice and stone. She lifted her head and looked directly at her parents. She didn't look at her mother, then her father. She looked at them both, as a singular entity, a joint problem to be solved. "Duty," she began, her voice perfectly level, cool, and devoid of any emotion save a chilling clarity. "Family. Let's talk about that." Her mother flinched, as if surprised that Mia was the one to speak. "I remember when I was 8, Mia continued, her gaze unwavering. "I won second place in the citywide piano competition. I came home, so proud, holding my little silver trophy. And you, she looked at her mother, asked me why I wasn't good enough to win first. You said the Thorntons' daughter won first, and it was embarrassing for you at the club. She shifted her gaze to her father. I remember when I was 16, and I told you I wanted to volunteer at the animal shelter. You told me to stop wasting my time on pointless hobbies and focus on networking with the children of your business associates. You said my time was a reflection of your investment in me, and you weren't getting a good return. With every word, the color drained from her parents' faces. This was not the conversation they had expected. I remember every dismissive comment, every sigh of exasperation when I didn't live up to your impossible standards. I remember every party where I was treated not as your daughter, but as a prop. A quiet, pretty prop you could use to signal your own good breeding. Her voice dropped, becoming quieter, more lethal. And I remember my engagement party. I remember standing behind the orchids. I remember hearing you discuss me like a piece of faulty merchandise you were finally, thankfully, unloading. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto her mother's. You said, and I believe I'm quoting you exactly, she's just a burden for us. Then, she turned to her father, you agreed. You said I was soft and that marrying Alex was the best you could hope for. A choked, strangled sound escaped Eleanor's throat. Richard stared at Mia, his mouth slightly agape, a look of dawning, horrified comprehension on his face. You said I was a burden, Mia repeated, letting the word hang in the dead air between them. A weight. A liability. And you know, you're right. I have been. My entire life, I have been a burden on your ambitions. So, you'll have to forgive me if I find your sudden appeal to family duty a little insincere. She sat back, a chillingly calm smile gracing her lips. Burdens don't save you. They don't bail you out. They weigh you down. It's time I lived up to your definition of me. The pieces began to click into place behind their eyes, but they were still too steeped in their own arrogance to see the full picture. What are you talking about? Her father stammered. The party, you heard that? It was just talk, Mia. You're being overly sensitive, as usual. Am I? Mia asked, her smile widening. Let me be more specific. Do you remember when your biggest client, Sterling North, first started having doubts about your stability? It all started with a simple project delay, didn't it? A delay caused because you tried to use me to pressure Alex into smoothing things over for you. She then turned her attention to the social ruin. And mother, your downfall on the charity board. Such a shame. All because of an anonymous package, wasn't it? A package containing copies of financial pledges and receipts. Documents that were stored in the bottom left drawer of the desk in the home office. An office I visited, you might recall, to pick up a childhood photo album about 2 months ago. Eleanor stared at her, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The tremor in her hand was no longer faint, her entire body was shaking. And the whispers, Mia continued, her voice relentless, a surgeon's scalpel dissecting their lives. The way your friends all turned on you. That started with Sheila Gable, didn't it? After I had a tearful little chat with her over tea, expressing my innocent concern that father was planning to cut her husband out of the business and go solo, she laid her entire campaign bare, connecting every single misfortune they had suffered directly back to a specific action she had taken. She explained how a chance conversation with a friend whose father was on the board of Sterling North had amplified their concerns. How a misplaced file she had found and given to a friend who worked in journalism had led to the damaging article. She omitted Alex's role entirely, claiming all the credit for herself. This was her victory. This was her revenge. They stared at her, utterly stunned into silence. The weak, soft, burdensome daughter they had so casually dismissed their entire lives was not weak at all. She was a meticulous, patient, and utterly ruthless architect of destruction. And she had built their ruin, brick by painful brick, right under their noses. You did this? Her father finally choked out, the words thick with disbelief. To us? Your own family? You defined the terms of our relationship, father, not me, Mia said coldly. It was always a transaction. I just decided to renegotiate the price. As her parents sat there, completely shattered, their world reconfigured into a nightmare of their own making with their daughter at its center, Alex chose that moment to deliver the final, elegant coup de grace. He had been silent throughout Mia's monologue, a supportive, powerful presence at her side. Now, he placed his napkin on the table and addressed Richard Davenport as if they were closing a business deal. "And as for your company, Mr. Davenport," Alex said, his voice as smooth and cool as polished steel, "your offer of a partnership is a little late." He steepled his fingers, the picture of corporate authority. "Over the past 6 weeks, as your company's value plummeted and your creditors grew nervous, an anonymous holding firm has been quietly buying up your outstanding debt. All of it. The bank loans, the lines of credit, everything. They bought it for pennies on the dollar. Your creditors were only too happy to offload what they considered to be toxic assets." Richard Davenport stared at him, a dawning, animal terror in his eyes. He knew what was coming. "That holding firm," Alex concluded, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is a subsidiary of my family's portfolio. It's mine." The acquisition of all of Davenport's son's debt obligations was finalized this afternoon. "Which means, as of 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, I am your sole creditor. I own you." He let that sink in, the silence in the room so profound Mia could hear the frantic, panicked beat of her own heart, not with fear, but with a wild, exhilarating sense of triumph. "So, no, I won't be investing in your company," Alex continued, his tone utterly devoid of malice, which only made it more devastating. "It was pure business. I will be absorbing its few remaining viable assets to recoup a fraction of my costs, and I will be dissolving the corporate entity known as Davenport Sons. Within a month, the name your grandfather built, the legacy you were so proud of, will cease to exist. It will be legally and financially erased." He leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm. "You didn't just underestimate your daughter," Alex said, his gaze flicking to Mia with a look of profound pride and love. "You underestimated her fiancé. That was it. The final blow. The complete and utter annihilation of everything they had ever built, everything they had ever valued. They had lost their company, their money, their social standing, and their legacy. But the most devastating loss, the one they were only just beginning to comprehend as they looked at the cold, implacable face of their only child, was that they had lost any shred of power or influence they had ever held over their daughter. They were left with nothing but the wreckage of their lives and the deafening echo of their own cruel words." Eleanor made a sound, a low, guttural moan of pure despair. Richard just sat there, his face slack, his eyes empty. They were broken. Completely and irrevocably broken. Mia stood up. Alex rose with her. There was nothing left to say. The debt had been paid in full. Without another word, without a backward glance, they walked out of the dining room, through the marble foyer, and out the heavy oak door into the clean, cool night. Mia didn't look back at the house. It was a mausoleum now, holding the ghosts of the people her parents used to be. Outside, the moon was bright, the air crisp and clean. Mia took a deep breath, filling her lungs, and it felt like the first truly free breath of her life. The weight that had been strapped to her back since birth, the burden of their expectations, their disappointment, their conditional love, was finally, blessedly gone. This was not just about destruction. It was about liberation. They reached the car, and Alex came around to her side, opening her door for her. Before she got in, she turned to him under the pale moonlight. The cold, hard mask she had worn all evening melted away, revealing the woman underneath, stronger, fiercer, but still her. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch infinitely tender. "So, what now, my terrifyingly brilliant partner?" he asked, a genuine, warm smile finally returning to his eyes, chasing away the last of the boardroom predator. Mia felt a true smile spread across her own face, a smile so radiant and unburdened it felt like a foreign, wonderful sensation. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, quiet space for something new to grow. "Now," she said, her voice filled with a lightness she had never known. "We plan a wedding. Our wedding. A small one. Maybe on a beach somewhere. With no guest list, no expectations, and no parents." She got into the car, and as Alex closed the door, she looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She saw a woman she was finally proud to be. She was no longer a burden to them. More importantly, she was no longer a burden to herself. She was free.